all the costs to go up. And we need to do this in order to make people better informed of how much they make, how much they contribute to environmental problems. But to do all this is costly, right? So there are two costs that people often forget. And it is the minimization of the total cost that is efficient, not just one side of the equation. The other people forget is abatement costs. Take for example, Japan. Japan is highly energy efficient. For over the years, they have been encouraging all their firms to be energy efficient, to innovate and so on. Japan companies have done especially well on energy efficiency. But society says that's not enough. We want more cleaner air, more protection of the environment. Sure, you can have more. You're going to have very high cost. It's just like the same thing as Singapore has very low crimes. Not zero, very low compared to many countries of the world. Do we want less crimes? Can we do it? We can. We can spend even more money on police surveillance, computerization. We can have more spend on police equipment. Sure, we can have. At what cost to society? Right? You spend more on one ministry, you get less money on other ministries. There's always a trade-off. People don't seem to follow this, you know. Sometimes we do so much, and yet you want us to do some more. Can we do it? We can. But at what cost? Society often don't see it. As I said earlier, cost-benefit must be done, but cost-benefit must be complete and not ignore the external effects and therefore miss out all the prices for non-market goods. But is that good enough? That's still not good enough, because the standard textbook on cost-benefit analysis, taking from literature in the West, have to be modified for the use in ASEAN countries and Asia because of many reasons. There's the valuation issues. In poor countries, financial markets are not well developed. Therefore, you cannot simply use the market interest rate to reflect the interest rate you use for public sector projects. The review preference approach to value goods used by the West, using contingent valuation, using methods like looking at property price differential and so on, it cannot work for Asia, for ASEAN, because of the distortion in markets, because of the level of education of the people, and so on and so forth. There are constraints. The other thing is cost-benefit use in the West. The equity issue is not a big thing, but in the Asian countries, there's wide disparity of income. Therefore, you have to think a lot about weights being used in cost-benefit. For those of you interested, I've just published a paper this year, actually, in February 2013, for this book, written by the Dean of the University of New York, and it's in Oxford University Press, 2013. I think I will stop here. My throat is also getting very dry. I beg your indulgence, because you can hardly hear me, the echo, my voice, and I think I took too long. So with that remarks, I thank all of you for coming to this talk.
Thank you very much, Houston. Well, sorry to hear that you have a very bad. Well, very quick summary. One of the first message is economic growth do carry cost, and actually this cost carry on to the future generation. Another point is the global agreement is hard to achieve. Therefore, we need to, formalize this from the bottom-up approach. So Houston proposed that the good local environmental management is very important. That would include pricing, externality, the cost-benefit analysis, the accuracy of the data collection, and using the method of the damage schedule, the green technology, and also to work with other stakeholders. Houston also mentioned about challenges for ASEAN. First of all, we don't want something toxic or the waste in our backyard, so he proposed the model that called not in my backyard facility approach. Also, he discussed about the pricing of the green goods, dealing with the solid waste disposal, transboundary pollution, and lastly, very important, challenges of the climate change. We have 6 discussants, and then the organizer asked me whether we should take a short break. I decided to say no, because we are about to run out of time. So let me, call upon, first of all, Dr. Nawal Kamel, please. Yeah. While she's walking here, let me introduce Dr. Kamel is now the visiting professor at the Faculty of Economics, Chulalongkorn University. Until recently, Dr. Kamel was a director at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. She used to serve as the deputy ministerial level in the Department of Natural Resources, Canada. She also earned the award of 2005 Key Woman in Energy Global Award from the Energy Marketers Association in the United States. She also spent 2 years at the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. She also the founding executive director of the Saviris Foundation for Social Development, the first family foundation for the social development in Egypt. She earned 2 PhD degrees, one in mathematics and one in economics from Sorbonne and from Oxford, respectively. Second, we have Dr. Mia Miki. She's the head of the Trade Policy and Analysis section of the Trade and Investment Division in the United Nations ESCAP. She also coordinates the ArtNet with Chulalongkorn. The Faculty of Economics, Chulalongkorn is actively involved. Previously, she was a professor of international economics at the University of Zagreb. She co-authored a very important book, Trade Statistics in Policy Making, a handbook of commonly used trade indices and indicators. Then we also have Alim Gopal, who was listed as one of the top 500 most influential Muslim of the world. We're honored to have him here. He's the Bureau Director of the Muslim Economic Affairs of the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos, Office of the President, Republic of Philippines. Most important, or very important, he's also the founder of the iinvestmentforum.com. So we have the aspect of investor here. Next, we have Dr. Hasri Adnan, who's a senior fellow with the Technology, Innovation, Environment, and Sustainability Program at ISEAS, or the Institute of Strategic and International Study in Malaysia. His specialization, is on the comparative environmental policy, on the green economy, climate change adaptation, and policy integration for sustainability. Then next we have Mr. Luki Lonto, who is an energy policy specialist. He worked with international and local organizations in Indonesia in promoting and disseminating information about energy reform towards alternative energy and green energy utilization to the public. And last but not least, we have Kun Thanat, who's a Thai, but living in Singapore. He's a research associate for the Regional Economic Studies Program at Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, Singapore. Well, his focus is on the development gap, public-private sector collaboration, and the green growth. So overall here we have, 6 discussants. When I take a look at the profile, we have at least 3 persons working on green economy, and also a couple involved with energy, trade, and of course, investment. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes each to share your idea on what Houston has presented earlier. Can I start in the order from my right, starting from Dr. Nawal, please. You have to speak with a distance from the microphone.
With a distance.
Yeah, because
that's easier.
Sensitive.
Hello, everyone. I see some of the young people here today, so welcome. Thank you very, very much, Professor Houston, of your very important and comprehensive approach to sustainable development implication on ASEAN. As comprehensive as it is, I want to focus my comments on, I think, a component that needs to be highlighted further. And I want to start with the beginning. And the beginning is where all this notion of sustainable development came from in the first place. As Professor Houston mentioned, it all started by a UN report. It's called the Brundtland Report, which back in 1987 coined the term sustainable development. And it focused the notion of development and growth of an economy of a nation into actually 3 components. The economic components, called the economic sustainability, which we talked about. The environmental sustainability, which we also was profusely mentioned. But it also had a 3rd dimension. And the 3rd dimension is a social sustainability. And I would like to focus my comments on this one, because when we talk about social sustainability, it does not necessarily always come with a price tag in terms of dollars. It could come with other types of price tags in terms of quality of life and social cohesion. What do I mean by this? I mean that if we talk about social sustainability, then the issues of justice, the issues of equity within a society, the issues of opportunities that are equally open to all, the issues of participation in the decision making, the issues of governance and institutions come right at the heart of the discussion, equally as important as the economic valuations that we hear about typically from economists. This 3rd dimension, the social dimension, was unfortunately neglected too long by too many economists. Even though from the beginning, the Brunton report did specifically mention, and I want to quote, that a world in which poverty and inequality are endemic will always be prone to ecological and other social crises. So from the beginning, this report was recognizing that even if you have growth, if this growth doesn't bring cohesion within the society, you have a problem. It is not going to be sustainable. What does this mean in practice? And what does it mean in terms of ASEAN? Well, the implications are, at least, if I want to summarize, in 4 dimensions. If we start to talk about social equity, we have to address the issue of redistribution of income and access to resources within ASEAN. Within ASEAN, we have a challenge, and the challenge is closing the gap between the rich and poor nations. In ASEAN, we have a region where the UNDP Human Development Index, which, as you might know, measures not just the income, but also the health and education status across nations of the world. It places Singapore as number 27, but then down the list, number 132, we find Myanmar. And these two belong to the same region. This is not sustainable. This has to be addressed. Why is it important to add that social and human dimension? Because without redistribution of income, we cannot have sustainable, continuous growth. Why does it matter? Because without looking at that, we tend to focus on the financial aspect of the environmental problems. We forget, for example, that taking care of the environment is very much, as Professor Houston said, also about adaptation. Not just try to put a tag price on green products, but also on seeing how the changes in the climate affect people, on bringing in challenges of addressing the issues of climate change as it translates to misery for people in terms of tsunamis and floods and smogs and the likes. Adaptation has to do more with how people can adapt to live in that new environment that we have created through economic growth. If we look at that social dimension also, we will realize that people do have the right and even the obligation to participate in the decision-making of things that have an impact on their life, and participate in the access to resources that are so essential for their own well-being. This means that if we look at that dimension, we cannot talk about social and sustainable development without also looking at our institutions, our governance, our ways of decision-making, at the transparency of the decision-making, at the corruption, at the institutions that we have to make the decisions and make the choices that Professor Houston was talking about. And in terms of ASEAN, this is a big challenge, because as we come together in an economic community, the big question will be how can we also make decisions together that are cohesive and that take care not only of an individual national perspective, but on the ASEAN perspective as a whole. If we think about that third dimension, the social dimension, we will also start thinking about energy poverty, not just energy in terms of the pricing, the subsidies for this product or that product, but we are going to start to think about the fact that within ASEAN, we still have 163 million people who do not have access to electricity. That means that cannot read or do anything when they don't have the sun shining. So such is, I think, the challenge, and I just wanted to highlight this dimension that is so often neglected in economic thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing up the issues on the social development and the social sustainability. Well, very brief on what you have said about the challenges for ASEAN, in particular on the social equality, that is the redistribution of income and the access to the resources, and also how to close the gap between the rich and the poor country. And well, one of the evidence that is the Human Development Index, that is a big range between the top country and the poor country like Myanmar. And also the right of people to make decisions on the issues that affect their life, and how to make the decision cohesively across country. And last point was on the energy poverty. Thank you very much. Later, I'll ask Houston to give a brief response. But next is Mickey. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to the organizers for inviting UN ESCAP through myself to be present here. We are always very pleased when we can contribute to activities related to ASEAN and in particular in Thailand, and even more especially so when it is happening at Chula Economic School, because that is a member of Asia Pacific Research and Training Network on Trade that you were told I'm coordinating, and I'm really very proud that Chula is a very active member of our network and contributes to the development of knowledge created in the region and disseminated in the region and used by policymakers very extensively. So thank you very much for that. And thank you very much, Professor, for the very elaborate introductory speech and the many issues that were brought to our table and to our attention. When I arrived to this venue, my friend Naval looked at me and she said, I know what you will be talking about, but as I'm speaking first, I'm going to talk about that too. And that's correct. As comprehensive the speech was, I also felt that it did not pay sufficient attention to the third component of sustainability that Naval just talked about, which is a social, and which is dealing with both pro-poor growth and more fair in terms of distribution of income and distribution of wealth. So I prepared little notes that also address that issue, but also other issues that are being worked on by our organization, Regional Commission for Asia Pacific, here in Bangkok. So I would like to start by bringing us back to what seemed to be portrayed in at least in last decade, but maybe longer so, between the conflict on the conflict between trade as an activity and trade liberalization or globalization as a policy, and environment or protection of environment or even sustainable development. And very often people will take sides in that, and they would simply interpret that if we want to go on the road of sustainable development, we will forget about further liberalization of trade, liberalization of investment, and try to produce locally and consume locally, because trade is being perceived as one of the largest contributor of environmental degradation and inability of people to protect the Mother Earth. And it doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, the factual statement that we often hear, that China is the largest emitter, if you wish, because China is also one of the largest producer, not the largest, but one of the largest, but it's becoming the largest trader. And why is that so? Well, because China is a hub of something that we call Factory of Asia, which is simply a place where final goods are produced and then shipped to the markets, to the destinations where they are consumed, which is typically in the United States and in the European Union, but also increasingly in some other developing countries in Latin America and in Africa. And why is this so? Well, because the cost of production of these goods, predominantly manufacturing goods, is lower in this part of the world, is the lowest in the Factory of Asia. And it is admittedly mostly because of the very low labor cost, but it is also because of, as we heard previously, of wrongly priced resources of energy, wrongly priced environmental resources that we have, like air, water, and also wrongly priced energy, right? So when you take it all together, when you have low wage for labor, which is a large component in labor-intensive production, and then you have all these other inputs that are underpriced or subsidized, therefore the social and private costs are not equalized, and they are put together, obviously you would locate then production from other environments in which all these prices are set in a different way, and produce here. You top that up with the increasingly lower and lower transportation costs, all right, and increasingly lower border barriers in terms of the transparently seen tariffs and etc., then it is so much easier to locate all the production in one space and distribute it through trade wherever it needs to be sent to be consumed. And so that's why we ended up as a region of really creating lots of environmental damage, and obviously we do it because we needed to secure growth in this region, right? So this region is known as the best example of export-led or trade-led growth. Most of the growth was driven by simply these mechanisms of being able to produce things here more efficiently, and then because of these other reasons that I explained, it was sent there to the rest of the world. So trade has been crucial to growth of this region. It did produce, you can read in many reports, in UN reports, in WTO reports, in OECD reports, any report that you will take, it cannot be denied that this region has grown for the longest period of time at highest rates of growth, and that the trade was the biggest contributor to that growth. Even in the short run, when the growth was interrupted by some shocks like Asian financial crisis in 1997, or even in 2008, 2009 global financial crisis, the recovery was driven by trade from this region, right? So in 1997, we all know that, it became known that Asia exported itself out of the Asian financial crisis, right? Likewise, in 2009, yes, there was stimulus in one country, another country, etc. But also it was the ability of the country to start trading within the region, as well as with some other parts in Africa that started to grow, and Latin America, so that the trade was again instrumental in solving that short-term problem with the crisis. Why I'm talking about the importance of trade in growth? Because while it is undeniable that the growth was driven by trade, it is also undeniable that that growth led to increasing inequalities and inability of countries to deal with the social consequences of these inequalities. And it is also undeniable, as my friend Naval said, that within such societies, that with deepening inequalities, the ability to deal with sustainability in environmental sense will be less. And that is, if you want nothing else, you can go back to the Kuznets curve, and that will be because of that. Because even though on the average the society will have a higher GDP per capita, there will be pockets in that society that will be very poor, and that will have no mindset and willingness to deal with environmental problems. And so that's why you will not have change in the behavior that is necessary, even though on aggregate you would have higher growth. So how we can actually, I know my time is limited, and I'm eager to hear my colleagues here. So I just want to end up by saying how we can turn this into a positive. How can we use trade in future to bring both not only this economic sustainability, which it can, but also environmental and social sustainability. And it's possible. Particularly, I think it should be possible in ASEAN, which has expressed itself, the people and the leaders, as building a community, therefore building, hopefully, some institutions where the choices would be made towards representing a majority and their needs, rather than minorities and their interests that often may lead the policies. But that requires actually having, as was said in the introductory question, data and analysis of that data that is objective and neutral, and also dissemination and building awareness of the results of such analysis. And so that's why I think the work that we do in UN, that is trying to actually help our members to build the statistical base for the future analysis, and build capacity to use the analysis for policy making comes handy, and we spare no effort to actually work with not only governments but also other stakeholders in helping them do exactly that. One last thought. I think while personally I am, schooled and educated to believe in free trade and free markets, and I still think that they have the highest value of all possible coordinated measures in the economies. I also am starting to believe very much in the value of proper, explicit, transparent green industrial policies, where the subsidies will not be given to the consumers for the final purchase of oil, petrol, or something like that, but where subsidies will be given for the research and development for new technologies, new materials, new renewable sources of materials and energy. And I think we as an international community, and in particular in ASEAN, because I know that it doesn't exist yet, should be actually agreeing on what are the subsidies that we'll be accepting as a community to deal with these common problems, and to help jointly deal with sustainable development challenges. Because if we don't do that, then what happens is that if we take it at the national level, one country will understand the value of investing in new technology, in materials, etc. But then it will distort relative competitiveness, and then the next country will react by the trade policies and the measures that will actually trying to countervene, obviously, the effect of subsidies. So we will have this hin and forth, money will be spent, and nothing much will be changed. Therefore, I think this needs to be taken as a because the problem is common, then the solution must be based also as some sort of the agreement. I know that this may sound as a top-down, but I think it should be driven by the understanding at the bottom of each member of such framework agreement or something, that that solution is only in that. Let me stop here, and then thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Miki. Dr. Miyamiki raised the issues about international trade and also economic growth, that the two goes together. And the trade and growth also result in the inequality, social consequences, and the other important issues on the environmental conservation. The other point that Miki raised was about the green industrial policy, that we have to think about it very carefully, in particular on the subsidies. So I'd like to just briefly summarize like that. Please, we have the next speaker. Alim, yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sabashari of the Chulalongkorn University. I was telling earlier to Dr. Miki that great inputs, but it's very, very challenging, especially for the ASEAN. My response to the discussion earlier of Dr. Houston is to be very particular on the role and the participation as expected from the governments, specifically with those working with the ASEAN. I could probably share my engagement, what really works as a matter of strategy when I joined the Philippine bureaucracy sometime in 2011. My background, I came from the private sector, and I would like to acknowledge the private sector as a very good element in our participation in addressing the concern of sustainable development. What our recommendation would suggest in particular is to highlight the participation of the small and medium-sized enterprise, as well as the cooperatives and the entrepreneurs. Why? Because in the Philippines, for instance, it really works, specifically under my bureau. I would like to quote the experience of the Smart Telecommunication and the Globe Telecommunication, one of the primordial actors in the industry of the Philippine government. When they started out their business sometime in the 1990s, there is a huge deficit. Why? Because they target only the clientele of A to C, and they normally had a clientele targeting the first 20 to 30% of the Philippine population, which is to have a registrant directly with the telecommunication industry. But that didn't really went well because having an economy sustained by the upper A, B, and C wouldn't really address the need of the telecommunication industry. Now, what they did is that they studied the current buyout, the